You learned early how to disappear without leaving the room. You learned how to sit still, how to soften your voice, how to read the temperature of a space before you ever spoke. You learned that silence could keep the peace, that quiet could prevent explosions, that staying small could keep you safe. And no one ever called it trauma. They called you mature, easy, so well behaved, the good one. But what they didn't see was the cost. Because inside you, something was constantly listening, watching, calculating. You weren't quiet because you had nothing to say. You were quiet because you were monitoring danger. You were tracking moods, measuring reactions, editing yourself in real time. You learned that speaking was a gamble, that expressing need was risky, that being too visible could make you a target. So you adapted. And here is the paradox. The quiet that protected you as a child now suffocates you as an adult. The skill that once kept you emotionally alive now keeps you emotionally distant. The silence that once prevented harm now prevents intimacy. The self-erasure that once earned safety now erases you. You may not even feel angry about it. You may feel tired, foggy, numb, like life is happening behind glass. Because the deepest pain of the quiet child is not that they were silenced, it's that they learned to silence themselves before anyone else had to. Psychologically, this pattern is not shyness, it is not introversion, and it's certainly not a personality flaw. It is adaptive self-suppression. At the center of this archetype is hypervigilance, a nervous system trained to stay alert to emotional threat. When a child grows up in an environment that expression leads to rejection, dismissal, volatility, or emotional withdrawal, the brain makes a decision. Expression is dangerous, silence is safer. This is not a conscious choice, it is a neurobiological survival strategy. The child's nervous system shifts into a state of constant monitoring. The amygdala, responsible for threat detection, becomes overactive. The prefrontal cortex becomes a sensor, filtering impulses before they reach the mouth. Over time, the child's default mode network, the brain's self-referential system, fills with questions like, is this too much? Will this upset them? Should I just let it go? Another key concept here is avoidant attachment, or more precisely, dismissive self-protection. The child learns that needs are inconvenient, emotions are burdensome, and dependence leads to disappointment. So they become emotionally self-sufficient long before they are emotionally supported. And then there is introjection, the internalization of external voices. The child absorbs the unspoken rules of the environment. Don't interrupt, don't complain, don't need too much, don't feel too deeply. Eventually, the external silencing becomes internal. No one has to tell the child to be quiet anymore. The child does it automatically, like a dimmer switch slowly turned down on the self. There is a specific kind of grief carried by the quiet child. It is not loud grief. It does not scream. It lingers. It is the grief of words never spoken, of needs swallowed, of emotions felt but never witnessed. Carl Jung once wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." But there is another burden rarely named, the unlived life of the child themselves. Because every time you chose silence over truth, you made a sacrifice, and that sacrifice was authenticity. You traded aliveness for belonging, expression for acceptance, truth for safety. And the fear beneath it all was simple and devastating. If I am fully seen, I will lose connection. So even joy became dangerous, even excitement felt risky, even anger felt forbidden. You learned to neutralize yourself, to become emotionally beige because neutrality felt survivable. But the body remembers what the mind rationalizes. The tension in your jaw, the tightness in your chest, the exhaustion after social interaction. This is the cost of chronic internal restraint. Philosophically, this is the tragedy of the quiet child. They did not choose silence because they lacked depth, but because they possessed too much sensitivity for an environment that could not hold it. and so they learn to carry the weight alone. The quiet child does not disappear. They grow up, and their coping strategies grow with them. You might recognize yourself here. You might become an adult who struggles with boundaries. You hesitate before saying no. You over-explain. You tolerate discomfort to avoid conflict because conflict still feels like danger. Feels invisible in relationships. You listen deeply, hold space, and offer understanding, but rarely feel truly known. Intimacy feels asymmetrical. Downplays your own pain. You tell yourself it wasn't that bad. You intellectualize trauma instead of feeling it. You gaslight your own experience. Has difficulty identifying needs. When asked what you want, your mind goes blank. Desire was never safe to develop. Becomes hyper-independent. You rarely ask for help, not because you don't need it, but because needing feels like weakness. Lives with chronic emotional fatigue. You are not lazy. You are tired from decades of internal restraint. These are not personality traits, they are coping mechanisms, and healing does not begin with forcing yourself to be louder. It begins with witnessing, with finally acknowledging the pain instead of minimizing it. The moment you stop asking, was it really that bad, and start asking, what did it cost me? That is where unlearning begins. Healing the quiet child is not about becoming outspoken or dominant or fearless. It is about permission. Permission to feel without editing. Permission to take up space without apology. Permission to exist without shrinking. Practices like inner child reparenting involve giving yourself what you never consistently received: attunement, validation, and safety. Shadow work allows you to reclaim the parts of yourself labeled too much. Somatic work teaches the body that expression no longer equals danger. This is slow work, sacred work, and it begins not with change, but with compassion. As philosopher Soren Kierkegaard wrote, the most common form of despair is not being who you are. You were never meant to disappear to survive. You were meant to be seen. And the goal of healing is not to fix what was broken, because you were never broken. The goal is to become whole. If this spoke to something unspoken inside you, share it with someone who learned to stay quiet too. Subscribe, not because you need more noise, but because your voice deserves to be heard. And slowly, gently, you can learn that silence is no longer your only refuge. You are allowed to speak now.